All right, let's get started with lesson 1, matter. Now it's important that as you follow along with this lecture video, that you make sure that you have your study guide out and that you take really good notes so that you can use your notes to prepare for the test and quiz over this material. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with matter. What exactly is matter? Well, according to our class definition, we are going to define matter as anything that has mass and takes up space. We can also think of space also being considered volume. So if you think about any objects or anything around you, and if they both contain mass and space, or in other words has volume, mass and volume, then we're going to consider them classified as matter. Now, we can further classify matter into two major groups. We can classify matter as either a pure substance or as a mixture. Now, a pure substance can further be broken down into either being an element or a compound. A mixture can be broken down into two major groups, a homogeneous mixture or homogeneous mixture, or a heterogeneous mixture. This classification of matter chart you should know really super well. We're going to, throughout the rest of this lecture video, describe each one of these categories, what an element is, what a compound is, what a homogeneous mixture, and what a heterogeneous mixture is. All right, so first of all, let's look at elements. Elements are defined as the building blocks of all matter or materials. Building blocks. So whenever you think of elements, think of building blocks, because it is the elements that are going to be responsible for building all of the matter around you, whether it's your desk, your computer, your cell phone, your food, trees, whatever it is that is considered matter is going to be built upon by or built out of these elements. Now, elements can also be thought of as a more scientific definition. An element is a unique form of matter that can exist on its own or in combination with other elements. So the idea, though, is that elements cannot be broken apart into different substances through chemical reactions. When you have an element, you cannot break it apart by any type of chemical means. All right? It is the foundation of all matter. Now, we know that there are 118 elements. 92 of them are naturally occurring, and the rest of these elements are man-made. All the matter in the universe is either an element or is made of some combination of all of these elements. Now, each element has a specific name, like silver or potassium or Einsteinium. It also has a chemical symbol that's associated with the name of the element. The symbol of an element always consists of an uppercase letter, which is sometimes followed by a lowercase letter for certain elements. For example, if you look at silver, silver has the symbol Ag. Notice that the first letter in the symbol is capitalized, followed by a lowercase g. For potassium, it just has a single symbol, K, and it is capitalized. Einsteinium also has two letters in its symbol, the capital E and a lowercase s. Now, you're going to become very familiar with the 118 elements that we know of. You're going to learn their names, and also you're going to learn their symbols, and we'll talk more about this in class. So where do we find all of these elements that we're talking about? Well, they're located on the periodic table. of elements. You have a periodic table of elements that's on the back cover of your study guide. All right, so here again we have silver, potassium, and einsteinium. Both of these are found in boxes on the periodic table. And here we got a periodic table that you can look at. So if we were to pinpoint these, for instance, silver down here Okay, so silver is located here on the periodic table. Potassium is located over here. And einsteinium is basically located clear at the bottom of the table right there. And so we can take those boxes and their location on the periodic table, and it gives us some information about the individual elements. You're going to become extremely familiar with the periodic table throughout the year. It'll become one of your really most useful tools that you will learn about and use in chemistry and really in science in general. All right, so we will discuss a lot more about the periodic table in our class. All right, so let's go to compounds. What exactly is a compound? We define a compound as made up of two or more elements that are found in fixed ratios and can be broken down into simpler substances. In other words, a compound is made up of elements in a fixed ratio, but that compound can be broken down back into its simple elements that the compound is made up of. For instance, let's say we have a chemical compound, copper oxide. Now, copper oxide is made up of the element copper and oxygen. And when those two come together, they form a compound that is what we call copper oxide that has a chemical formula of CO. All compounds are represented either by their proper name, such as copper oxide, or their chemical formula. And we're going to learn how to name chemical compounds in due time, as well as how to properly write the formulas, the correct chemical formulas of these compounds. Now, copper oxide is found in a 1-to-1 ratio. What does that mean, that fixed ratio? Well, it means that there is one copper for every one oxygen when it chemically reacts. So in other words, it takes one copper atom or one copper element and one oxygen element when they combine to form that compound. All right, so here we take, for instance, again, the element copper and the element oxygen off in the periodic table, and we're going to combine these two elements together, and we're going to create the compound copper oxide. All right, now copper oxide again has a chemical formula of CuO, which is found as a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, usually we use the ratio or shown the ratio as subscripts in the chemical formula, like 1 and 1. Now, if it's a 1-to-1 ratio or one subscript, we usually just leave it alone and don't even write it, such in the case of copper oxide, and so most of the times we just represent it as CO. All right, let's do another one. Let's say we're going to take the element hydrogen and the element oxygen from the periodic table, and we're going to combine these two elements together, and we're going to form a chemical compound called water, which you're very familiar with. Except the ratio between hydrogen and oxygen to form water is not a 1-to-1 fixed ratio. Instead, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. There are 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen represented in a chemical formula to form water. All right. Now, water can only be water is if it maintains that 2-to-1 ratio. If you actually change the ratio, so say like we have a H2O2, it is no longer a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio. It is now really a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-2 ratio, which reduces to 1-to-1. This is not water. It is now hydrogen peroxide. All right, by just changing the ratio, we actually change the identity of the compound. So that's important to remember and make note of. All right, so compounds and elements are pure substances. They have different structures, they look differently, different colors, they smell differently. For instance, we have copper, which is essentially an element and is a metal. Sulfur is also an element, and you can look at the difference. They're very different. We're going to show you real life samples of these elements in class. And then we have compounds like sodium chloride is a compound, and it has a formula of NaCl, and it is a 1-to-1 ratio. And then you have copper sulfate, and its formula is a little bit more complex. It's CuSO4, but the ratio here is 1 copper to 1 sulfur to 4 oxygens. So it's really a 1-to-1 to 4 ratio, represented by the subscripts. And remember, if it is a 1 in the subscript, we usually do not write it in. Let's look at mercury oxide. So mercury oxide has a formula of HgO, and basically it is also going to have a 1-to-1 ratio as well. Sucrose, which is a sugar, is a very complex molecule, and we're going to write its very simplified chemical formula, which is essentially C6H12O6. So it's made up of 6 carbon atoms or 6 carbon elements, 12 hydrogen elements, and 6 oxygen elements to give us a fixed ratio of 6 to 12 to 6. All right, and so those are the proper ways of looking at the ratios of compounds. All right, now what we're going to move into is talking about modeling. Models are very important in chemistry. So what exactly are models? Well, this statement here, I'm going to point out some important points here, and I'm going to highlight some things, and you might want to do the same thing. Because elements and compounds are so small that we cannot see them with our eyes, chemists often build models that are used to represent elements and compounds that make up materials. Models are only representations of what we believe matter is like and how it behaves based on observation and experimental data. So in other words, we can think of a model, and this is the way I want you to always think of a model, is that they are theories. Models are simply theories. And these theories are backed up by both experimental observations and data collected in order to explain the behavior of matter. In fact, this really is what a theory is. A theory is an explanation of how matter behaves or how it works. All right? So we build models all the time. Scientists have been building models forever, and all they are is theories to explain the behavior of matter or how something works. Now, scientists, and this is also very important here, scientists often use models, or when they use models, are often modified to fit new experimental data. So as new experiments are done on the behavior of matter, sometimes our models have to be adjusted slightly because we find new information or our measurements become better, and so then we take and modify our theory or our model to fit the new experimental data. And that's really important. We're going to see this common theme throughout chemistry. All right, so here are some specific types of models. These are called space-filling models, and we will be using space-filling models throughout the year. Space-filling models just simply show us the atoms that are involved or the elements that are involved in creating a compound and how they are arranged in a three-dimensional space. Give you a few examples. For instance, oxygen here. This is represented by two elements of oxygen that are chemically bonded together. Water is built around, as we've mentioned before, an oxygen and two hydrogen atoms. Carbon dioxide is made up of a carbon atom and two oxygens. So the formula for water, again, is H2O. For carbon dioxide is CO2. And the ratio, again, is 1 to 2. Water is 2 to 1. Oxygen is O2 for its chemical formula. Ethanol, right here, which is alcohol, essentially. And there's several types of alcohols. Ethanol is one of them. It's made up of carbon atoms, two of them, and it's made up of several hydrogen elements and oxygen. And it actually has a chemical formula of C2H5OH. All right, so this OH here is what makes it an alcohol, so that's why I've written it the way it is. But really, it is made up of 2 carbons and 6 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So it really has a ratio of 2 to 6 to 1. All right, and then you can get into even more complex molecules like aspirin and so forth, which has even a more complex chemical formula with a bigger number of ratios of atoms there. Now, some models that we'll be using quite a lot are called particle models. These models are basically used to represent the particle nature of atoms, molecules, and compounds. So let's represent some particle models here really quick. Typically, what we're going to see is elements are usually circular in the model. They come in different sizes and different colors to represent different elements that are in our model. So in this model, we have sulfur atoms and we have iron atoms. All right, and it is a mixture of iron and sulfur. So sulfur by itself is a pure substance. Iron by itself is a pure substance. But when they're mixed together, they actually form, well, a mixture. All right? And they're no longer just a pure substance, but a mixture. Now, when we take these elements and they're actually combined to form a compound, then they're actually going to be really connected together. And that connectivity really shows you that we have a compound forming here. In this case, we're going to form the compound iron sulfide, which has a formula of FeS. And so it has a really a 1-to-1 ratio as well. And usually you're going to represent it in the particle models the correct ratio of the atoms that are in, or the elements that are in the compound in our particle model. We'll be using particle models a lot. You're going to be asked to draw them. You're going to be asked to interpret them throughout the year, as well as on exams and quizzes and so forth. All right, so let's get to mixtures really quickly and finish up our lecture video. Mixtures, by definition, is simply made up of 2 or more pure substances that do not react with each other. So when you put 2 compounds together, we now have a mixture, as long as that they don't actually react with each other and change their chemical structure. All right. There are 2 types of mixtures, as we mentioned earlier, homogeneous and heterogeneous. We're going to look at heterogeneous first. By definition, a heterogeneous mixture is not uniform. That's the key thing there, is that a heterogeneous mixture is not uniform. all right? That means its composition is going to vary. The two substances mixed, but they don't dissolve. And I think maybe that's a good way to indicate the difference between, or to look at a heterogeneous mixture, is that there's no dissolving going on here. They're mixed together, but no dissolving. So for instance, rocks and water together make a great heterogeneous mixture because rocks do not dissolve in water. All right. Here are some pictures of heterogeneous mixtures. We have some M&Ms here, some different candies, some pizza, and so forth. These are all have multiple different pure substances that are mixed together, but there's no chemical reaction going on here, and there's no dissolving really, and that's the point. I mean, think about the pizza. All right, we don't see the cheese dissolving the tomatoes here, or the onions dissolving in the tomatoes, or the tomato sauce that's on the pizza dissolving the cheese. Okay, they're mixed together, but they're not dissolving. The same thing with the M&Ms. The different colors of M&Ms are mixed together, but they're not dissolving either one of them. All right, and so forth. All right. So let's make a model really quick. All right, so here we have a beaker. And what we're going to do in this beaker is we're going to place some oil. Oops, change that out. We're going to place some oil in our beaker. And we're going to put some water in our beaker. Now, from experience, what do you know? Does oil and water, do they mix? The answer is yes, they really do. But do they dissolve one another? The answer is no. So what happens is you're going to actually get a oil layer on top of a layer of water. So you have two pure substances. Oil is a pure substance and water is a pure substance. They're two compounds. They're mixed together, but they do not react with each other, nor do they dissolve each other. So therefore, you're going to see the oil layer separate from the water layer. The oil layer will be on top because essentially oil is less dense than the water. All right, and so what we can say here is that not uniform because the oil will not dissolve. In water. Okay. So this, I think, is really the key there. Won't dissolve. All right, so let's take a look at a homogeneous mixture or a homogeneous mixture. And it's just going to be the opposite. We're going to find that it is uniform mixture. For instance, when you add salt, sodium chloride, and water together, salt dissolves in water. And so you're going to get a complete uniformity there that is occurring, and it's going to, the resulting mixture is going to look the same throughout. You shouldn't see any separate layers like you did with the oil and water, but one complete uniform mixture throughout. So for instance, Kool-Aid, when you mix water and Kool-Aid mixture, which is mainly sugar and some dye together, you're going to form a uniform mixture. Notice that you don't see any layers. It's completely uniform throughout. Orange juice, the same way. The orange juice is made up of a lot of pure substances, compounds, and elements that are mixed together, but there's dissolving going on there, which creates this uniform mixture. Looks the same throughout. All right, another way to look at a uniform mixture is what is known as a solution. By definition, a solution is a homogeneous mixture made up of two or more substances that can be solids, liquids, gases, or combinations of these. There are two parts to any solution. The solute, let's go back. the solute and the solvent. The solute is simply either a gas, liquid, solid, and it's going to get dissolved, okay? And that's the key. The solute is going to dissolve into what we call the solvent. And the solvent is usually the one that's represented by the greatest quantity that's part of the solution, all right? Usually solvents are liquids. And so the solute dissolves into the solvent. All right, so let's do a model here. And let's take a close look at this. Let's use our salt again, okay? So salt is a pure substance. It has a chemical formula of NaCl, a 1-to-1 ratio. Basically, Na is sodium and Cl is chlorine in a 1-to-1 ratio. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some salt in our beaker, and we're going to add some water, which is also a pure substance. Water is H2O as its chemical formula. And when we put those two things together, the salt is going to actually dissolve in the water. So the salt is the solute, and the water is the solvent. All right? And so it results in a uniform mixture, and this mixture is going to be the same throughout. There's going to be really no differences, no layers. In other words, you're not going to see a salt layer, and you're not going to see a water layer. It's all going to be one complete uniform mixture. All right? Why is this a uniform mixture? Because the salt dissolves, right, into the water. Okay? The salt dissolves into the water, and we got our uniform mixture. All right? So there we have it. Here are some basic ideas of matter and how we classify matter. We've learned what an element is. We've learned what a compound is. We've learned what a homogeneous or homogeneous mixture is, and a heterogeneous mixture. All right? Make sure that you spend some time studying these ideas in your notes super well for the quiz that we will take over this in class. Make sure you come prepared for that, and this is it for now.